Меня зовут Светлана Сугака.
Я Надя Бродская.
Нас задержали 9 августа возле одного из избирательных участков, когда мы мирно защищали свои права на свободные выборы. По ночам мы слышали, как в соседних камерах и на коридорах избивают мужчин. И я боюсь, что эти звуки будут преследовать меня еще очень долго. Но можно сказать, что нам повезло, и мы не подвергались изнасилованию, в том числе посторонними предметами, как это случилось с другими людьми в тюрьмах по всей Беларуси за последние несколько дней.
Но есть и хорошие новости. Все они требуют ухода Лукашенко. Мы сделали свой выбор. Вся Беларусь поддерживает женщину, которую зовут Светлана Тихановская. Именно она выиграла эти выборы.
А наша мечта – это жить в свободной и демократической Беларуси без убийств, пыток и изнасилований. Мы просим вас обратиться к вашим премьер-министрам и президентам, чтобы они не признавали Александра Лукашенко законным президентом и заставили его уйти в отставку. Мы обращаемся к вам за поддержкой всего белорусского народа, который хочет мирной смены власти. Присоединяйтесь к нашей кампании «I Stand with Belarus». Живе Беларусь!
Welcome to this virtual event, Standing with the Women Leaders of Belarus. I'm Madeleine Albright, the director of the Georgetown Institute for Women, Peace, and Security. Yesterday, we marked Human Rights Day, and today we focus our attention on the human rights defenders and democratic activists of Belarus. We join with the courageous women of Belarus and all of their fellow citizens who have been demonstrating peacefully for months for a democratic nation. Every Sunday, thousands of protesters pour into the streets, calling for the removal of the authoritarian President Lukashenko. They remain committed to this struggle, despite police brutality, torture, and imprisonment. Women have played an outsized role in the pro-democracy movement of Belarus. 3 of them in particular helped to energize their fellow citizens, rallying their country and inspiring a nation. After all the male candidates were barred from running for office, one of them, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, registered as the presidential candidate when her husband was jailed and couldn't run. Today, we want to focus on what is happening in Belarus and what each of us can do to stand in solidarity with these extraordinary efforts of the pro-democracy movement. Before we start, I just want to remind our audience that you will have an opportunity to submit questions throughout this discussion. We already have many pre-submitted questions when you registered. If you want to submit questions as you're listening to the speakers, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen and tell us your name, organization, and to whom you are directing the question. And one final announcement. We hope that you will tune in to the 2nd season of our podcast, Seeking Peace, which explores the ways that women around the world are bringing lasting peace to their communities. You can listen to Seeking Peace on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or at seekingpeacepodcast.com. This week's episode features a conversation with Secretary Albright and Secretary Clinton that was recorded earlier to mark the 25th anniversary of the UN Fourth World Conference that took place in Beijing, and where those stirring words still echo around the world: women's rights are human rights. We are so very honored to have former US Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, with us today. She, of course, needs no introduction, but I would be remiss if I didn't note that among her many, many distinctions, she's also a distinguished professor of diplomacy at Georgetown School of Foreign Service. She also serves as the chair for the National Democratic Institute I'm always reminded that Secretary Albright has never forgotten where she came from, understanding keenly what a loss of democracy can mean, because as a child, she and her family were forced into exile when the communists took over her native Czechoslovakia. She speaks passionately and writes powerfully about democratic values and institutions. And she has been an inspiring voice for those struggling for democracy, championing human rights and women's rights as well. And she is with us today, standing with the courageous women of Belarus. Secretary Albright.
Thank you, Ambassador Verveer, and good morning to everybody. And I'm thrilled to be able to kick off this event. And I'm delighted to add my voice to those who are standing in strong support of the women leaders of Belarus. Just a few weeks ago, I had the honor of appearing virtually at a conference alongside Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. And I asked her what we could do to support the pro-democracy movement in Belarus. And she said to make sure that the world knew of the role that women were playing as leaders and instigators of change. And that is why we are here today. In the book I wrote a few years ago about fascism, I noted that authoritarianism comes in a variety of shapes. There is no one model, but there are certain common characteristics. And one is the need that all tyrants have to exercise control and bend others to their will. To that end, they propagate the myth that those who oppose them are less than human, that they're not equal in dignity and worth because of what they think or where they come from, or the language they speak, or the color of their skin, or their sexual orientation or gender. The propaganda is reinforced by words that dismiss and demean, by physical cruelty aimed at generating submission, and by policies designed to prop up the strong and hold the disadvantaged down. We know that women are among the principal targets of such policies, and that women suffer disproportionately when civil society is repressed, journalists are thrown into jail, judicial systems lose their independence, and elections are drained of their meaning, because that is when the voices of change are drowned out and the status quo, controlled by the fraternal order of despots, is reaffirmed. Here in the United States, those of us who followed the 2016 presidential campaign do not have to dig very deeply into our memories to recall the 6 signs, slogans, and sneers. And in Belarus, it was not surprising that one of Europe's longest ruling dictators, Alexander Lukashenko, scoffed at being challenged by a female candidate in this year's presidential election. Throughout the campaign, Lukashenko mocked his opponent, Ms. Tikhanovskaya, as nothing more than a housewife. She just cooked a tasty cutlet, maybe fed the children, and the cutlet smelled nice, he said in one interview. And now there's supposed to be a debate about some issues. Lukashenko has always counted on good people failing to act as they should, either because they are confused or divided or afraid. He has thrived amid silence. Democracy, however, depends on people who have the courage to speak up, join together, and fight back against injustice. It depends on people who refuse to be intimidated or to bury their ideals, people who insist on truth. Like so many others, I have been deeply moved by the courage of ordinary Belarusians led by women who have risen up in recent months in support of democracy. Lukashenko has responded to their peaceful calls for change with brutal violence and by arresting more than 30,000 protesters. He continues to refuse to accept the will of the people, preferring instead to hide in fear from his own citizens. Democracies around the world have rightly refused to recognize his illegitimate attempt to hold on to power. But we must do more to support the movement to bring dignity and democracy to Belarus. Early this week, the National Democratic Institute paid tribute to this movement at our annual gala. And in particular, we spotlighted one remarkable activist, Nina Bahanskaya. Nina is a 73-year-old grandmother who has become an inspiration to the movement. She is known for displaying her red and white flags and peacefully defying the police. She is one of thousands of women who are making clear in Belarus and around the world that we are done asking for our rights. We are born with our rights. We do not need anyone's permission to practice them. And the message we are broadcasting today with this event to the officials in Belarus, in Europe, and around the world is that if you attack one of us, you attack all of us. But if you stand with us, we can and we will make the world freer, more peaceful, and more just than it has ever been. Živě Belarus. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Secretary Albright, for your powerful words and your even more powerful example for what you do every day to advance democracy and for being with us today. We now turn to Irina Krasnovskaya, the president of We Remember Foundation, which has as its mission to bring officials of the government of Belarus to justice for the disappearances and murders of political opposition leaders and journalists. Following the abduction and murder of Irina's husband by security forces in Belarus, she has campaigned extensively to raise awareness for the plight of those who have disappeared during the dictatorship of President Lukashenko. Irina, thank you for being with us.
Oh, thank you. Dear friends, today the whole world can see the courage of Belarusians protesting against the stolen election and human rights violations. But at the same time, we can see the unforgivable brutality of the police and military against peaceful and unarmed protesters. This is exactly why we cry out every day, save Belarus. Help us to save our country, and our people. For the younger generation, Belarus in 2020 seems like a new phenomenon, but it's not. Systematic oppression has been a fact of life in Belarus for the past 26 years. Lukashenko and his gang have broken all moral boundaries since 1999, when they kidnapped and murdered their political opponents, Yuri Zakharenko, Viktor Gonchar, Dmitry Zavadsky. Among them was my husband, Anatoly Krasovsky. We never found their bodies or where they were buried. In 1999, the death squad kidnapped and disappeared citizens of Belarus in the dead of night, attempting to leave no traces of their atrocities. But today, the regime brazenly violates human rights on camera and in a broad daylight. They wear masks and adopt false names, but everyone is aware who has given the orders and committed the crime. In 2000, with the help of the international community, we managed to stop enforced disappearances in Belarus. But today we need even more help because the odds are not in our favor. Unarmed civilians are facing heavily armed special forces. Over 30,000 persons have been arrested. There are 156 political prisoners held in prison now. The deaths of at least 7 people have not been investigated. How many people have to die before the international community takes action? Will the death and suffering of Belarusian people be in vain? Indeed, the suffering in our country will be in vain if the international community cannot act with conviction and speed. The women who are on this call and everyone who is attending this event have an enormous power to act, and we need to use it now. This is why we ask all of you to call your organizations, your governments, your national leaders to force the Belarusian government to stop the violence and respect the will of the people. Only then can we create a new Belarus with the rule of law, freedom, and democracy. Then, and only then, will we be able to find our loved ones and bring peace to our long-suffering nation. Thank you, and long live Belarus.
Thank you so much, Irina, and thank you for that call to action, which we all need to hear and respond to. We're going to turn now to our panel, who are going to discuss the situation in Belarus from different perspectives, starting with Dr. Anaïs Merin, who is the UN's Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in Belarus. She is engaged in monitoring and providing advice on recommendations to improve the human rights conditions in Belarus. She is a researcher with University of Warsaw and associate fellow in the Russian and Eurasian program at Chatham House. An expert on Belarus, she has taken part in many OSCE ODIHR election observation missions, including in Belarus. Anaïs recently testified at the Area Formula meeting at the UN Security Council. This is how she began her testimony. The situation has never been as catastrophic as it has been the past month. It is all the more worrying because it continues to deteriorate. These developments, which are unprecedented in Belarus, require the renewed attention of the international community, as there is great risk that a spiral of violence could threaten regional peace and security as well. Dr. Merin, that statement was made 3 months ago. What is the human rights situation at this time? What is the UN doing? What do you think the international community should be doing?
Thank you, Mrs. Ambassador. Thank you all for organizing this event and for reminding indeed the statement I made on the 4th of September. Unfortunately, the situation remains catastrophic. It keeps on deteriorating. I would just like to remind that as an independent expert, I am not a UN staff, so I am not really entitled to speak in the name of the UN and shouldn't be seen as such, especially given the consistent opposition that there is within the Human Rights Council against my mandate and the activation of resistance against the mandate and the recommendations and the calls which we have been making at several levels with other special rapporteurs, thematic ones, calling to halt violence for a start, to hold a genuine and inclusive dialogue as a second element. And from what I see, this has not happened yet. If you allow me, I would remind how I see the situation at now. So as you said, there are systemic problems with respect for human rights in Belarus, and this is what justified the establishment of my mandate back in 2012 already. But this year, fundamental freedoms were further restricted already before the elections. Since then, human rights violations have become systematic and targeting, and this is what I see as new, all human rights, not only civil and political rights. As I stressed in my last report to the Human Rights Council, social, economic, and cultural rights are affected too. All regions of Belarus are concerned now by these massive human rights violations, and all layers of society, whatever the professional or age category, political opposition leaders, human rights activists, lawyers, journalists, bloggers, medical personnel, factory workers, retirees, students, and even children have been the victims of an intense repression. And as you reminded, at the forefront of the protests were women who self-organized back in August in order to peacefully channel popular demands for free elections and for ending police violence. Unfortunately, they have not been heard. And if you allow me, I can draw attention on 3 features of the current crackdown, which I believe qualify as gender-based violence. The first one is rapes and threat of rapes. I am, of course, very worried about these numerous allegations of sexual violence on women and girls in detention centers conducted by police officials or prison guards. And from what I see, there is limited, if any, evidence of steps taken by the authorities to launch investigations on these issues. And this is extremely serious. This, of course, is part of a wider trend towards using torture, which I remind is absolutely forbidden according to international human rights standards. The second element, which I see as a gender-based violence, is the systematic repression against female opposition leaders. I will not come back on the fate of all the three leaders who successfully launched a unique presidential campaign in last summer. I would only remind about the fact that one of them was there was an attempt against Maria Kolesnikova to expel her. And this tends to be a new practice. You expulse opponents, or you prevent them from leaving the country, or in trying to entice them into fleeing, as is now the case since the announcement of the closure of borders. Mrs. Kolesnikova has been charged for calling for actions aimed at harming the national security with the use of mass media and the internet, which carries a sentence of 2 to 5 years in prison. Her associates, Mrs. Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya and Veronika Tsepkala, were both forced to leave the country due to intimidations and threats regarding the safety of their family members and relatives. And this leads me to my third and last point. There are accumulating evidence of intimidation used against families, and notably against mothers and single mothers, using the threat to withdraw custodial rights from protesters over their underage children. This is an application of infamous Decree number 18, which guarantees state protection for children in so-called dysfunctional families. However, from the information I received, there is a trend towards using the threat of depriving parents of their custodial rights, and this is being used to prevent people from taking to the streets, or to also restrict the rights of minors, of children, to participate in peaceful protests. I will stop here and look forward to questions. I can answer more specifically about what is the UN doing, perhaps at a later stage during this talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that very comprehensive picture of the deteriorating human rights situation in Belarus, and just how far the actions of the government are extending in terms of those violations. We're going to turn now to the Council of Europe, particularly to Dunya Mijatovic, who is the Council of Europe's Commissioner for Human Rights, where she works extensively on issues related to the protection of minors, women's rights, other human rights concerns. She's an expert on media and law and regulation, and has served as the OSCE representative on freedom of the media. Earlier, she was also director of broadcasting for the Communication Regulatory Agency in Bosnia-Herzegovina, among many other positions that she's held. Dunya, if I may, as Commissioner of Human Rights at the Council of Europe, how do you see the situation in Belarus from a regional perspective? What is happening in Belarus is a matter not only for the people of Belarus, but for the rest of Europe as well. Is that right? Is that how you see it?
Thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. First of all, I'm really honored and very happy to be part of this distinguished panel, even though it's in cyberspace. hopefully next time we'll be able to meet in person. So I'm just checking, can you hear me properly?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. So in order to try to answer your question, I think I need to take off my Council of Europe hat and become somebody who I am, a woman from Sarajevo, from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and a person that deeply feels about all the challenges Belarusian women are facing, not only because of my work, but also based on my experience, on my many visits to Minsk, to Belarus, working with many extremely outspoken, courageous women and men. We have seen the importance of women's activists in preventing retrogression and also ensuring positive change across Europe. But you know, if we talk about Belarus, we can ask ourselves, who has been leading the mass protests against the rigged election and shocking police violence, arbitrary detention and torture? Women. So in many of my public appearances, you know, many were talking about Corona and pandemic. But I think it's also, you know, women that played a very important role, starting from Belarus, going to Poland and many other places where they stood in front of huge problems in the society. And it is to these brave women that we should direct our support and solidarity. When it comes to the Council of Europe, I can say that Belarus is the only European state that is not a member of the Council of Europe. It is therefore not subject to the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights, and most monitoring bodies of this pan-European organization that I work for as a Commissioner for Human Rights. However, like any other country, it is bound by international human rights law and obligations. And I think this is something we should continue repeating, particularly when it comes to ill treatment, torture, detentions, abuse, and all this information that we are constantly receiving from Belarus, from the Belarusians that are present in Belarus, but also many activists, many human rights defenders, including many that are present with us today, many journalists, extremely courageous people really doing extraordinary work. The current crisis in the country has clearly illustrated what could happen if a government fails to uphold fundamental democratic principles and human rights. And indeed, we have seen in recent months a violent repression of peaceful and legitimate protests, large-scale and systematic ill treatment, documented, and torture, targeted persecution of political opposition leaders, of journalists, of human rights defenders, and a total, but really total absence of any accountability for perpetrators of human rights violations and a lack of justice for victims, which is something that all of us working for international organizations, no matter if Belarus is a member or not, should be taking into account. Impunity for serious human rights violation represents one of the, I would say, major obstacles for setting a genuine national dialogue, prosperity, and peace in these countries. And this holds true for, I would say, any country in Europe and in the world, and should always be kept in mind. On the other hand, I'm comforted to see how eager and determined Belarusian society is to demand for democratic changes. It is an inspiration for all of us. It is an inspiration also for people that went through horrifying times, like, you know, people of my own country, Bosnia and Herzegovina, where Bosnian women also play a very important role in fighting for their rights, in showing that even during the war, they have to stand firm and defend the rights, defend the families, defend the well-being, and also to be courageous. And Belarusians have shown unprecedented solidarity, self-organization, and the willingness to take a future in their own hands in a peaceful manner. And civil society, I would say, has been a driving force, and there are many extraordinary people with us today, including Natalia Colada, a very dear friend and a courageous woman. And they have been a driving force for many public initiatives and nonviolent resistance.
Thank you very much, Dunya, for that perspective. We're going to turn now to Yelena Luchenko. She's a Belarusian professional basketball player who was a European champion bronze medalist. She helped the Belarus basketball team get to the Olympics at least twice. She's a WNBA Eastern champion, and in 2010 was selected as the best center of the 2010 World Championship. So she's clearly a celebrated athlete, but that's not why she's here with us today. She's also a human rights activist who spent 15 days in October in jail after peacefully demonstrating against President Lukashenko's disputed re-election. A star athlete who is using her voice to support the people of her country and stand with them at this critical time. So Yelena, take us to where you were when you made this decision to stand up against the government. Why did you decide to take this step, clearly knowing the risks? You're also representative of your generation. What did the government do to respond to the actions you took? And what do you wish others would do now to help your country?
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I feel really privileged to be in the presence of all of you. I listen to everyone speak, and I feel this strength and the power, and it's really, really amazing. I'm sorry if I might be a little bit nervous. This is my first time being in the panel like this, but let me take you guys back to when it really started happening for me. It started happening for me in the summer time when I started seeing how things were done by the government, how people started being treated to the candidates in the election, prior to the election, when things started happening, and people of Belarus started waking up. When I say waking up, they wanted to go and vote. They wanted their voice to be heard, and they start going and giving their votes to the candidates that were running for the presidents. And then things started happening when the candidates started being put in jail. And it was that one day I was coming back from maybe training, and I didn't look at my phone, and I opened my phone and I realized that one of the candidates, Babariko, he was put to jail. And I think that time it just clicked to me that this is not right, and I can't be quiet. I mean, something didn't feel right within me. I couldn't sleep that night. And in the morning when I woke up, I was so overwhelmed with everything that was going on. And of course, I took it to my social media, and I said, that first message that I wrote, and I said, give us the freedom to select and give us the freedom to choose. And of course, everything spread out throughout the country, in the newspapers and everywhere, and people start talking about it. And it was only a few of us athletes at that time that actually use our voice to stand up and say we're not agreeing to what is happening. And to be honest with you, it was a little bit difficult because it's not a country of democracy. It's a country with a dictatorship. It's a country where you can't really freely speak. And that was a little bit difficult for me. But the best thing was for me that I spoke my truth, and there was nothing that would change my mind at that point, because I couldn't constantly see what was happening. TV is controlled by the government in our country. We don't have newspapers that write, the independent newspapers or independent channels. So everything is controlled by TV. Nobody literally, people who know what is going on, don't really watch TV. So seeing everything that was happening through internet, that's our only way to kind of understand and know what is happening in the country. I just couldn't watch it. And I was continued to raise my voice and saying that I was not agreeing and using my platform as a professional athlete and, you know, as the voice that I feel that I have as an athlete. And after August 9th, after the election, all of you know about all those terrifying things that had happened when the country was left literally without internet for 3 days and we didn't know what was happening. And of course, when the internet came out and we found out the things that has happened, I mean, it was tragic. And honestly, to be there at that time, I mean, I was shaken up. And after August 9th, it was the first, when people of Belarus got together, it was August 16th. I think it was around 400,000 people in one place, beautiful, great-minded, peaceful people that just strive and want to have freedom. I have played in so many countries, on so many competitions, Olympics, you know, everything. I was pretty fortunate. But I have never experienced that type of energy and anything like that, this greatness, this unity. And after that, you know, I have decided that I'm going to continue to speak about this issue, what was going on. I was participating in the women's marches, which was also beautiful. Well, on Saturdays, women of Belarus get together and they march. Of course, further in time, it started being difficult for women, and I'm sure you all have seen how the force was applied towards women, how they were taken to jail. And further on, when the marches was happening, we have decided, and the athletes that had the same opinion as me and had the same thoughts, we decided to get united. And it's a Free Athletes organization where we said, we're gonna be the voice of people. This is the time that we have to become the fans for our people. After all this time, the people have supported us. This is the time. And we start going to the demonstrations. We're always there with our big banner, and we'll always come out there. Of course, we knew that living in the country like that, there's a chance that we might get arrested. You know, to be honest with you, every time we would go, and we would always write our lawyer phone number on our wrist. We would memorize it, but we would write it because, you know, just in case you forget or you get nervous. And technically, this is what has happened to me. On September 30th, I was planning to come to Greece. This is where I currently am now. I still wanted to continue to play, and I was coming back from a surgery that kind of stopped me from playing basketball for some time, and I was rehabbing and coming back. And September 30th, I was supposed to fly to Greece. I left early in the morning. My father drove me, you know, I drove the car, we went both together to the airport. And when I said my goodbyes, I walk in the airport, I wrap my bags in the plastic bags. The next thing I feel, it was a tap on my shoulder. When I turn around, I had two policemen looking at me. And, you know, it's something like that. You think, not necessarily came prepared for this. It just kind of happened. And I turn around. And of course, I knew at that time. And they said, I'm sorry, we have to arrest you for participating in unorganized or unsupervised, they call it unsupervised marches. And can we have your passport and your phone number on your phone? So I had the time to call my lawyer real quick, to call my mom, but never was my rights read to me. After that, I was put in a regular car. There was not a police car, and there was some men that were not in police. They didn't have no badges, nothing. And of course, they use coronavirus as to cover up their face, and they always wear a mask. And they took me to the police station where they would put me in the room, and I asked for my lawyer again, and that was my right. And they said that they can't do it, or they're not allowed to do it. And I didn't sign any papers. The next thing I realized, I was taken to a Krestino, the famous Krestino for a really scary things. And a Krestino has two parts. One part where you stay there up to 72 hours before you have your court day. And then within 72 hours after your court day, you get transferred to the main part of Okrestino. I remember this story. I was put in the cell. So with all my bags and everything, I was taken to jail, which is really crazy. And I think they did it on purpose to show and put fear in you. I think this is the only way that this government and this system can control you, to put fear. So other athletes, other people will steal. We did this to her. And so with all my belongings, all my things, I was in jail. And they put me in the cell, and it was another female. I think she was it smelled really terribly, alcohol. I mean, it's a jail, I understand. But I never forget this. I was on the second, the bed has 2 layers, and I went on the second layer. There was no mattress, it's just kind of wooden bed. They gave you the sheets, it was really cold. And I just lay there because I think I was still in shock. And the next thing I hear, a woman singing Kupalinka. It's Belarus songs that women, when they go on the marches and they sing these songs. And I'm hearing these songs and they're singing. And they're singing so beautifully that I'm laying there and I start singing. And the lady underneath me, she said, "Wait, you know this song?" I said, "Absolutely, I know this song." And we're singing, and I have a tear coming out of my eye. And at that time, I'm realizing, oh my gosh, it doesn't matter if they put us in jail, if they scare us, we're still united and we're still here and we're still fighting for our freedom. And when they finished singing, everybody started clapping. So I hear the man who was next door, because the walls are not really thick, and we start clapping. And it's like at that time, you just realize that you there not because you did something. It's not there because you committed a crime. You're there because you're fighting for freedom. And the spirit of people. I mean, I was so amazed. Within an hour, I had a court day, and this is where I found out I'm going to be in jail for 15 days. I'm not going to go really in details. I had to take a time. I asked to go to the bathroom, and when I walk into the bathroom, it was like something you think about in a movie. Wait, I'm going to be in jail for 15 days. I represented this country. I have not committed any crime. I represent the country at the Olympics at the highest competition possible, and I'm here in jail. And then I put myself together, and they took me back to my cell. They transferred me to a different cell where at least there was a mattress, and that's where I spent the night. The following day, they had to transfer me to the actual Okrestino jail, and this is where everything kind of started. I was put in a cell for 4. I was the 4th female. 3 of us were for participating in marches, and 1 female was, I think, for a different reason. The first night was okay. I slept on the second floor, I call it, of the bed. And then the following day, October 2nd, after breakfast, the guard came in and he said, "Wrap your mattresses and walk outside." And we didn't know why. We didn't do anything. And maybe they were taking it to clean them, or they're using this technique to put it in a really, really hot place to kill the fleas and all that. And we took him outside, and then he told us to go down in the hall and open the door and put him there. So we left him there. Within an hour, we had another 2 females to put in our cell. So now in a cell of 4, it was 5 of us without pillows, mattresses, blankets, I mean, nothing. At that day, hot water disappeared. We didn't have hot water, and the toilet started flashing. So all these things kind of started happening. We didn't understand why. And by the night, we keep asking and asking, and we keep knocking on the door, and nobody would come, and nobody would open the door, and we just keep knocking and knocking. And then this guard came, and he was so angry, and he pulled one of the girls, and we thought we're not going to see her, at least for the night. We didn't know where he would take her. Within 5 minutes, she came back, and she was a little shaken up, and he said, "If we're going to continue to beat the door, knock on the door, he's going to take us outside, and he's going to pour cold water on us and leave us there for the night." And he told us that we're not going to see the mattresses technically. And he said, tell your old female friends. And this is how it started. It was the first night when I slept on the bench, and the bench is not wide. The cell itself was maybe 8 meters long, and the width of it was maybe not more than 3 meters. I measured with my wingspan, counting the beds. So you have these beds, you have a little hallway, a little walk, and then this bench, and then this table. So the first night, since I was the tallest one, I slept on the bench. My fellow friends slept on this table, and the other females, we tried to figure it out. To be honest with you, the newspapers have saved us, because we decided that in order to sleep, we have to find a way, because the beds are not a flat bed, it's iron beams. So it's 4 iron, like this wide beams on 4, and these are holes. So how can you sleep? You don't have a mattress. There's no heating in the cell. So we started putting the newspapers and whatever clothes we had, we share with each other, at least to try to sleep. Some females had to lay together, that way it would be warmer to kind of sleep next to each other. And I'm looking at it like, are you kidding me? Like, this is 21st century in the middle of Europe, and we're dealing with tortures. And this was happening for the whole time I was in jail. For the rest of 13 nights, I slept on the iron beams. In the midst of all 15 days, I was never taken to shower. At some point, I decided that the only way I can at least feel the water, if I pour myself with the cold water and at least use a soap a little bit. Where I stood, my legs were between the toilet. They turned off the hot water, and some of us females had periods. And the only thing you have is ice cold water to literally wash yourself. And I know it might sound, but this is what happened. And we were hardly taken to walks. There was times where they didn't take us to walks for 5 days, and we were in the cell. And periodically they would take females and they would put more, so it would be more of us than it's supposed to be. So women would sleep on the floor. And before before my time was up, I started itching really bad, and I told them, I think I have fleas. And my cellmates looked through my hair, and I had fleas. Then I found out I had fleas in my clothes. So when I told them, they kind of didn't much care, and they gave me something for my hair. It really didn't help. I asked for more, for which the answer was, well, I think it's your nervous system. And they never come back and got my clothes to clean it. So long story short, I mean, this is how the females and males and things that's happening right now, where there's abuse of human rights. There was one situation, I know I'm taking maybe a long time, but I really want you to understand how insane this is. There was one night they took us to watch propaganda TV. It was us and 5 or 6 men from a next cell of ours. Long story short, it was a conversation where at some point I said, that's my only chance to ask, does he wear, and the man that was in front of us was in charge of a crest in the jail. And it was my only chance to ask him, does he know in which conditions we are in? And when I rose my hand, like I was a girl in school, he let me speak, and I asked him, do you understand that we don't have the things that I just told you? And the answer I have received was enough for me that everything was done on purpose and they're aware of what they're doing. And the answer I have received is, I'm here in control in which conditions you're in. And this is done for you, so you don't ever want to come back here. And that's the only answer. I didn't ask to expect them to change something. I asked to really understand and look in his eyes that you're aware, you know exactly what's going on. Where my friends, the fellow cellmates that were sitting behind me, they said, do you understand this is a violation of human rights? You're having women in these conditions, you don't even have men. And the guys who were sitting in front of us, they were in shock. And he got really nervous. And he said, I'll think about it. And he left. Of course, we didn't expect anything to change. And he left, and this is how it was. Before I left, they gave me another court day. I had a second court where I thought I was going to spend another 15 days in jail, but for whatever reason, they gave me a fine, and I got free. So by just telling you the story, I want you to understand how powerful and how strong these women are. I stayed with almost 11 women throughout my whole time because they were constantly changing. Not one woman that I've been in cell with said, oh my gosh, I'm regretting that I did this. I'm regretting that I'm here. They said, no, we're going to continue to fight. We're going to continue to speak. We're going to continue to raise our voice because we want to live in freedom. We want to live in independent countries. Do you understand the strength I'm talking about? I mean, it's amazing. And I consider all of them my friends and my sisters, and I don't know. I know I'm taking much time, but I want you to also tell you this, how serious the situation is. One of my cellmates that was with me, she now got 2.5 years in jail because she was in the women's marches. And when the men unrecognized with balaclava have taken her, because they don't have patches, they don't ask they don't say who they are. And she's trying to take it off. And apparently she scratched him a little bit. And she just got 2.5 years in jail. But there's 0 cases have been done or started against police, against brutality, against rape. So me sharing this long story with you, I just wanted you to understand what is really going on and how strong these women are, and that we need your support. We need your help to fight this, to fight these repressions, to fight this regime. I have never been so proud to be from Belarus like I am now. Живе Belarus.
Thank you so much, Yelena. I think all of us are going to remember what you just told us. Your personal testimony is very powerful. And so is the story of resilience and that yearning for freedom that you described. So thank you for doing this. I know it wasn't easy for you to recount what you went through, but hopefully it will motivate all of us to do more. We're going to turn now to Natalia Colada, the co-founding artistic director of the Belarus Free Theater and director of the Creative Politics Hub. The Belarus Free Theater was founded on the principle of freedom of speech, artistic expression, and a fearless challenge to President Lukashenko's authoritarian rule. Natalia is known for an approach to the arts and politics that brings systematic change. She is a writer, a diplomat, a human rights campaigner, and a producer challenging the anti-democratic actions in Belarus. For her work, she was forced into exile in 2011 during another Lukashenko crackdown on protesters. Natalia, you've been fighting for democracy in Belarus for nearly 2 decades. I first met you in 2011, another time of repression when you were bringing that struggle to our own government officials at the time. And here you are, still continuing that struggle to free Belarus at this historic moment. So for our participants who are listening from all over the world, for those in positions of influence, what is the most important role that we can play, that they can play? How can we all stand with the brave women of Belarus and move beyond words to concrete actions? I know you have been knocking on doors, talking to everyone with whom you can speak, spending a lot of time with officials, trying to get some recourse to the struggle. So can you give us a sense of what would make a difference?
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for such the introduction. And I thought that I will not manage to speak after Yelena spoke, because it's such a difficult testimony. And I know with our managers who went through jail the first week of August, when they went through torture while then being kept in 3-on-3 meters with 60 women. And it was necessary to completely undress in order to get some space. And those particular memories I know will stay not only with them, but will stay with me till the end of my life. And I always dreamt that we will have women battalion and division while we've been fighting with dictatorship in Belarus. And now I know when Belarusian athletes are with us, we could definitely make it. And we're also supported by doctors who could help us in different parts of the world. And I'm
that will be a speech that I need to read, because this is the Christmas list or New Year Eve list for everyone who is listening. And if it's done, then hopefully we will find a quick transition to peace in Belarus. And it's a great honor and privilege for me to co-organize this event with you, Ambassador, and with your brilliant team, and have such an esteemed panel of women who found time in their busy schedules to be with us and deal with Belarus. And with some of them we work for 20 years, with some for 10 years, with some 5. And it's really great to have also new faces. It means that the situation got really changed. And today I will focus on what has to be done by the international community to strengthen the resilience of Belarusian society and show support to the democratic movement. As Belarus continues to exist in political turmoil for the past 26 years, elements of international support were present throughout the existence of dictatorship. But it is important to note that this support has facilitated purely the survival of Belarusian democratic society. While now, this must change into the full transition from dictatorship to democracy, and we can't waste time anymore. While the US, UK, and Europe are trying to deal with COVID, recognizing how dangerous it is, Lukashenko and his regime are using COVID as a lethal weapon. Up to 60 people are packed into tiny cells, 9 meters, designed to accommodate 4. Right now, Lukashenko is using any tools to kill the population of Belarus. The way he dealt with COVID only reminds me of Chernobyl time. Just 2 days ago, Lukashenko announced that Belarus will close its land borders and people will be prohibited from living or entering the country. What we're witnessing is buildup of North Korea-like state in the center of Europe. Could we allow that? No. The main question that is always asked is traditionally, what can we do? The first, and it will be an appeal to the United States, with who we worked for so many years, and with the help of Hillary Clinton when she was Secretary of the State, it was possible to impose all possible sanctions, including economic, within one month after rigged elections. For the starters, the US must implement the EU's political will. Financial sanctions against those who probe the regime must be evolved and implemented. Their assets have to be frozen and any transaction between banks are to be banned. Government institutions and organizations, such as the Law Enforcement Organization, AMON, Almaz, Gubopik, and organizations such as Central Electoral Commission have to be sanctioned as whole entities. Economic sanctions have to include the possibility of switch off SWIFT for Belarus. It is necessary to stop using the long existed assumption that economic sanctions and switching off SWIFT will make the people of Belarus suffer. They're suffering now. They're killed, they're tortured, they're raped. To confirm those not my words, but words of people of Belarus, last week we organized a poll on the Voice platform that is called in Belarusian Russian Golos, and 64.19% of people voted in favor of switching off SWIFT. People of Belarus are ready to sacrifice and send a Mayday message to the world now, and they are doing that for the last 4 months. Anti-money laundering tactics, including FCPA, are to be implemented on any bank accounts linked to the regime. Russian propagandists, including but not limited to Russia Today, have to be sanctioned. The simplest step that has to be happened now is for the Senate to pass the Belarus Democracy Act on human rights and sovereignty. The states, international donors, civil society should bring all efforts to investigate cases of kidnappings and murders that took place in 1999 and provide a substantial support to lawyers who work on it on ICC cases. At the same time, substantial support has to be provided to families of those who got kidnapped and killed since 1999 and other cases of murders, including August of 2020. Also providing full financial support to lawyers who work with political prisoners and full support to their families. International community must insist on immediate release of all political prisoners.
State, international donors, civil society, Belarusian diaspora should substantially increase support to victims of human rights violations. Persons who were fired from their jobs on political grounds, participants to strike, human rights defenders, lawyers, artists, journalists, students, small business owners, and members of other groups affected by repression located both inside and outside of Belarus. It is necessary to provide psychological assistance and work with psychologists who deal with PTSD and have experience in countries that had war, because the situation in Belarus reminds only what happened in Europe 30, 40 years ago. For today, more than 30,000 people got arrested. Around 500 cases confirmed by UN went through torture and rape. Needs assessment with participation of Belarusian experts should be conducted and regularly updated. I just got back from trips to neighboring countries around Belarus. Every single state has to look into their regulation and make exemptions for Belarusian refugees. For example, in Ukraine, there is a very strict law on 90 days stay in Ukraine. For many people who get relocated from Belarus, it's not possible to move to Belarus or go to another country. It means there is a necessity for the parliament to look into the law. This is just one example. United States should accept on their territory, as well as EU, Belarusian fleeing repressions and provide assistance to them with a temporary status, social security, healthcare, access to labor market. They should develop a clear procedure to fast-track consideration and issues of visa and create humanitarian corridor in cases where Belarusians are in urgent need of medical assistance and seek refuge for political reasons. States should set up a new and substantially expand scholarship programs for Belarusian students expelled from Belarusian universities for their pro-democratic stance. Likewise, scholarship for academics who lost their teaching and research position over participation in protest should be provided. Similar to it, those artists who are fired, as it's happening in many different theaters, including the only and the main opera house of Belarus, together with the conductor, have to get temporary jobs in the best opera houses all over Europe and the world. States should provide the necessary support for Belarusian workers and employees of various organizations who went on strike. Enterprises and their management responsible for harassing and dismissing their employees on political grounds should be put on sanctions list. American and European trade unions should be supported and established in partnership with independent Belarusian trade unions. Currently, organizations who work inside of Belarus face a major issue of funding relocations. While states are announcing about increasing funding to Belarusian society, there is almost no chance to deliver money into the country. It's vitally important to develop those new mechanisms that must include cryptocurrency operation when the state won't have a control of it. States and international donors should further increase support to Belarusian society, including through the provision of funding, equipment, security assistance, rehabilitation. States and civil society should pay special attention to access to information of the Belarusian citizens, as journalists and independent media are heavily censored and targeted by the regime. In line with the demands of Belarusian athletes and the Belarusian Sports Solidarity Foundation, international sports events scheduled in Belarus should be canceled. Canceling international sports events scheduled in Belarus should help to isolate the regime and to damage its reputation in the eyes of the public. The first step is done by MOC. No Belarusian official participation in international sports competition should be permitted unless all athletes imprisoned or otherwise harassed in Belarus for their political positions are released, and they must participate in those international sports competition. Today at this panel, and with many of our friends who take part in this fantastic event, vitally important for Belarus, those people who work with us on a daily basis, as Olga Zakharova, Susan Kork, Cynthia Schneider, it's time for us to establish Women for Women Alliance. We who are here have so much power, as Irina said, and with that power, we are connected to each other and look after Belarus for many years. But this time we must pool all our efforts to make a peaceful transition and look after other women, like those for who the fight is new, but they have a long way to go and they have incredible courage. those people like Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, whose husband Sergei Tikhanovsky is in jail, and Maria Kolesnikova, who is in jail already for 4 months, and many women are going to the streets every single day, putting their fear behind them and thinking only about peace and democracy. Winter is coming, and while the world, in even times of COVID, will find a way how to enjoy Christmas, remember, people in Belarus arrested every day. They are kept outside of jail, facing cement walls with their hands back when it's freezing cold. From my personal experience, I know what is happening in Belarus. When I was in jail, facing that wall for 20 hours, the guard of a Krestina jail said that when democracy will come to Belarus and dictatorship will be over, he said that he will stay in his place and he will continue to serve in jail. This is the most scary phrase that I will remember till the end of my life, because those people have to understand what is individual responsibility, that they have to be sanctions, and they need to give answers for all those tortures, rapes. The dictatorship in Belarus has been entrenched for 26 years. It is a long period for modern history, and not surprisingly, can be easily overthrown in a matter of few months. Given the fact that Belarus is also a neighbor of Putin Russia, it is obvious that when we deal with Belarus, when we take down dictator in Belarus, we give that major example to people of Russia, and then they will be able to free themselves from Putin and Kremlin. Then Ukraine will be able to stay peaceful and without any war. Then it will be a chance for us to stabilize European continent. It is obvious that Belarus needs serious multi-directorial support that will save it from becoming a long-term hotspot on the European continent. Thank you so much. Живе Belarus!
Thank you, Natalia, and thank you for giving us that extensive platform for action. There is much that can be done and should be done. Before we go to our audience questions, I want to bring your attention to Senator Jeanne Shaheen. She is a member of the United States Senate from New Hampshire, the first woman in history to be elected both a governor and senator. She's a member of several important committees, including the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, where she chairs the subcommittee on European affairs and is the only woman on the Foreign Relations Committee. She's also top-ranking woman on the Armed Services Committee. The most important thing to say about her is that she's been an extraordinary leader for protecting democratic institutions, for improving security cooperation, and for advancing the rights of women everywhere. She couldn't be with us in person, but she so wanted to, and she has sent this message. And Natalia, listening to you, talking about what the United States can be doing and about the Belarusian Democracy Act, let's listen for a moment to Senator Shaheen, and then we will go to questions.
Good morning, and thank you to everyone involved for organizing today's important event. While I can't be with you in person, I am so pleased to be able to join the chorus of amazing women featured here to support the Belarusian people in their fight against tyranny and authoritarianism. At the forefront of that fight have been the women of Belarus. They are leading the opposition, courageously standing up for their country and protecting their fellow citizens from widespread police brutality and violence. Their perseverance came as a surprise to Belarus' illegitimate and misogynistic leader, Alexander Lukashenko. But the women of Belarus have a long history of resilience. They built their country after World War II and have organized and led movements to fight against Lukashenko's oppressive tactics before. It therefore comes as no surprise that Belarusian women have led massive protests recently, protests that have seen fully 5% of the population on the streets at any given time, calling for change. For this reason, even if the Belarusian protests have not yet achieved all of their aims, they have already made history. This is important, not just for Belarus, but for all those watching around the world. It proves that the desire for democracy and freedom is strong despite attempts by strong men to starve these movements. And it shows that women can and will lead the way. As a senior member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, I commend all Belarusians for their bravery and heroism and believe that they're owed the support of democracies the world over. I urge our own government to actively promote the Women, Peace and Security Law and to advance policies that support Belarusian women and enhance their physical safety and dignity. The U.S. must also use its existing authorities to respond to the violent actions of the Belarusian police and security services, as well as those in Lukashenko's inner circle. And finally, I'll continue to push Senate leadership to take up the House-passed Belarus Democracy Act. Now is not the time to sit on the sidelines. We must stand with Belarusians and support them in their fight against oppression. I look forward to continuing to push for more action from our own government and our partners, and to encourage everyone to do the same. Thank you, and keep fighting.
Well, thank you, Senator Shaheen, and I think that strong message from her is a really important one for all of us who care about the struggle for freedom in Belarus today. We're now going to turn to our audience for their questions, and we will take as many as we can in the time that we have allotted. So, Ali, can you help provide those questions?
Sure. We will start with a couple specific questions on U.S. policy. The first from Michelle Kellerman at NPR. Do you expect the Biden administration to do anything differently than the Trump administration on Belarus? What specific measures could the U.S. take to influence Lukashenko? And does the opposition support the idea of a returning U.S. ambassador to Minsk?
Natalia, do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you so much for this question. We definitely do think that Biden administration will be absolutely different to Trump administration, even though, of course, I need to thank George Kent and Stephen Biegun for all the job that they already done on Belarus, because these are the major people who help us now, and hope that they will still manage to help before there is a transition in between two administrations. With the president-elect, we had two personal meetings in 2011 and 2012 when Joe Biden was vice president, and it was a major support to Belarus. It was major support in implementing all sanctions against Lukashenko, because situation in 2010 in terms of election and crackdown, I could say wasn't different, but it is different now because of the scale, because now 30,000 people, more than 30,000 got arrested. In terms of what is possible to do, of course, we're waiting for very small thing is to have just a phone call in between Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and President-elect in order for Svetlana to congratulate Joe Biden with such the victory. And of course, we expect her visit to DC in January to already discuss establishment of relationship with new administration. But first, we need to do Belarus Democracy Act, as it was mentioned by the senator. Also sanctions. We need to put on sanctions Lukashenko wallets, those who probe him for years, his money backs, if we say it directly. They need to go and their assets have to be frozen. This is the first thing. Economic sanctions have to be on the list as well, in order for economy to stop working, because this is the way how Lukashenko paid to riot police, and riot police harass people and torture them. And as I mentioned in my speech, that people of Belarus already voted, and they voted by numbers. 64.19% are for economic sanctions, and they say we suffer now from Lukashenko, we will not suffer from economic sanctions. It will be only for a few months. And after that, we will start to rebuild new free Belarus.
Thank you. Ali, let's go to another question, please.
I'll group a couple questions here on women at the front lines of the protest movement. The first, how has the role of women activists and female leaders in particular helped mobilize the protest efforts? And how do you see this developing going forward? Why is it important that women occupy this space? And lastly, is their participation unique in this protest movement, or is there a long precedent?
Who would like to start with that one? How have the women mobilized? Will it continue? And is there any history of women being this engaged?
I very quickly only start in terms of women engagement. There is, in terms of women engagement, this is exactly that legacy and continuity that exists in Belarus. And today we have Irina Krasovskaya with us. And this is one of those women who stopped kidnappings and murders in Belarus. And it was that major group of women whose husbands got kidnapped, but also women of political prisoners. And it goes through years of existence of women resistance in Belarus. But in terms of scale, it's completely new one. And I'm sure Yelena and Irina will add on it.
Yelena or Irina? We can't hear you.
I'm here. Regarding, women, I think trying to understand the question correctly, being, in the protest, I think, I want to take you back a little bit what happened after August 9th. And, when all these things we found out after internet came out, and we found out all this beating and tortures that happened to people, this tremendous act by women wearing white, going on the street with flowers. I think as a human being, every time somebody hurt us, we want to do the same thing back. And I think in that act, women of Belarus show so much strength to say, no, we're not gonna fight. We're not gonna do the same thing you did to us. We want peace, we want to be heard. And I think just in this act, women showed the strength, and they're here to stay, and they're gonna continue to fight, and they're gonna stand up with people, for people. So sorry, my phone. So I think by that act, women of Belarus showing strength is showing they're not going nowhere. They're here to stay. They're going to continue to fight, and they're going to continue to support, and they're going to continue to unite people. So that's what I think.
That's fine. And Irina, do you want to add anything?
Just very briefly, in 1999, when we started our campaign to find out what happened to our family, so it was easier because it was only 4 of us, and we tried to find out what had happened to our loved one, and so we tried to knock to every door we could. But today, the situation is completely different. Today, the women are organized by themselves. And so today, the real heroes are in Belarus. The people, that's women who are in demonstration, the women who try to organize books and food for prisoners, the women who raise their red, white flags, they are all heroes. And I think we have to thank them and support them very much right now.
Just as someone watching from the outside, the history in Belarus is that men dominate politics there, and women have often been put down, as we've already heard. And to see this massive leadership on a scale, as Natalia said, that has not been seen before, has been extremely powerful for all of us watching from the outside and cheering you on. Another question, Ellie, please.
Sure, I'll put two here. There's a couple on the role of regional support, more specifics on what the Council of Europe and Human Rights Council can do to create conditions for change, and how the European Union can support the democratic movement in Belarus while their own bloc is dealing with the authoritarian and anti-feminist regimes of their own member states, some of their own member states.
So Anais or Dunya, you want to take that from your perspectives?
Yes, I can start regarding the Human Rights Council. As you may have heard, the European Union initiated an urgent debate on Belarus back in September, following which a resolution which was adopted, which tasked the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mrs. Bachelet, to draft a report, a special report on the human rights violations following the elections. She will present it in March at the next HRC session. And 1 week ago, on the 4th of December, she took part in an interactive dialogue and presented an oral update on the situation. Again, as I said in the beginning, as I'm not a UN staff, so I'm barely kept informed about what else is going on behind closed doors at the level, for example, of the UN Security Council or elsewhere in New York. The only thing I know is that the situation with human rights in Belarus is taken extremely seriously, that we know that Belarus, unlike in the OSCE, for example, doesn't feel that much isolated in the UN system, because it wants to be seen as cooperating with UN mechanisms. It had its third universal periodic review this fall. It is very much involved in the SDGs, etc. But I think it's also because it enjoys support of two countries which are permanent members of the Security Council, and unfortunately, that will probably make our allegations, the allegations that we are trying to voice out, and our calls for launching an international independent investigation into the most serious human rights crime, unfortunately, limited. I mean, there will predictably be a resistance there at political level. That's why, well, for the victims of torture in particular, and they're probably the best hope is to look at possibilities for filing complaints with national criminal courts abroad until the judiciary system in Belarus is reformed and able to guarantee the rights of people to a fair trial, which is not existent at the time. But in the meantime, I would like to stress that several countries, including in Europe, including notably neighboring countries, have been quite active in this field. There are a number of initiatives I'm aware of, and I look forward to seeing some judicial decisions being taken against the perpetrators, so that this feeling of impunity, which we can observe, stops, and eventually that could also deter the perpetrators from continuing with violence.
Anissa, can you speak at all to the Moscow mechanism that the OSCE has been engaged in? I think some 17 countries now, including the US, the EU, the UK, have signed on to that, and there's been an investigative report that has been done. My understanding is that the next step would be to put together some kind of international investigative body. What would that take, or what can you tell us more about this course of action?
Well, indeed, the report was prepared by Professor Wolfgang Benedek, who is a renowned international law expert, and he was involved, for example, in a similar reporting procedure under the Moscow mechanism of the OSCE regarding crimes committed in Chechnya. And his report, I think, is authoritative in the sense that it gathers a number of evidence of both electoral malpractices and violations during, in terms of the political process and the elections, but also, of course, human rights violations during and after the elections. It also makes a number of recommendations, both to the government of Belarus and to the international community. Most of them echo the recommendations which myself and my predecessor as special rapporteur with the UN have already published and called on the authorities to implement, to no avail so far. But the one thing I would like to stress is that the OSCE participating states, it's true, it's 17 of them, it's quite a huge number, initiated that process, but the report should not be seen as an OSCE report. Actually, a lot of countries present it as Professor Benedek's report, including when it comes to recommendations, which some people, some analysts and colleagues of mine in the academic community see as not realistically implementable right now. However, I think there is a momentum. There will be some follow-up, probably for two reasons. First, because the problems with the leadership issues at the OSCE, which have been hampering the work of the organization this year, are predictably going to be solved now that leading positions have been filled with the new appointees. And second, because the incoming chair, Sweden, has always been very much mobilized on the issue of human rights in Belarus. So I look forward to seeing Sweden indeed giving an impetus, an impulse to the political response for implementing or calling the authorities to implement the recommendations made by Professor Benedek, and also within the so-called Troika of this, which involves also Poland, which will take over from Sweden in 2022. And as you know, Poland is very much mobilized also on Belarusian human rights issues.
Thank you. And Dunya, really quickly, we're just about out of time, but do you want to add anything from your perspective?
I already said, I mean, the situation is quite bleak when it comes to Council of Europe, because Belarus, as I already stated, is the only European state that is not a member of the Council of Europe, and it's not subject to the jurisdiction of the court. Nevertheless, particularly I can talk in relation to my job. Like any other country, they are bound by international human rights law and obligations. And what I can assure you that I will continue working with civil society and trying to do as much as I can. The objective of the Council of Europe remains the rapprochement and accession of Belarus to the organization based on values and principles. But at the moment, this is quite problematic. So what I think is of crucial importance that we all stay engaged, not let the pandemic really not make the pandemic make us forget about the problems in Belarus, because human rights violations are persisting in Belarus as we speak. And against this backdrop, I would like to stress once more that I welcome all these steps that are taken by European and international organizations, including the OSCE Moscow mechanism, no matter how as I said, is not possible to implement, but it is a document. There are many things that are documented there, and I think for the future, we will also need documentation of all this grave human rights violation in order to be able to move forward.
Well, thank you so much, and I'm sorry we can't get to more questions, but I think we have really gotten from all of you an extraordinary and comprehensive view of the situation that you and your country folk are struggling through in Belarus that should matter to all of us. I want to thank Secretary Albright and Senator Shaheen, to the EC Commissioner, to the Rapporteur for the UN on Belarus, and especially to the extraordinary women of Belarus who were with us today, to Irina, to Yelena, to Natalia. You represent so many others, and I know that was your intention, to speak not just for yourselves, but for all of your fellow citizens who are struggling for freedom today. I hope we will join that struggle in all of the ways that we can, and many of those opportunities have been laid out for us, particularly by Natalia and the Platform for Action that she put forward. And also that we become a Women for Women alliance with all of you joined together for democracy and for human rights. So thank you so much. We hope for better days ahead. We call on everybody to do what each and every one of us can, and ever onward in this important, important pursuit. Thank you all.